Promise, and I just want to talk a little bit about the nerfs that have come in, and there's been plenty of videos that have gone through all the cards that actually were nerfed and people's thoughts and opinions on that. And I don't have really a ton to add to all of it, but I do want to talk about something that I've heard a lot of people mention, and I think might have some insight into, and that's this idea of design space and why some of these nerfs happen. So what do we mean when we say design space? So one of the things that I think is important to consider when thinking about Hearthstone is really how simple, a seemingly simple set of rules and architecture has been set up around the game. So one of the first things to consider is this idea of the mana crystals. So Hearthstone, unlike say a card game like Magic, that really you can have an infinite amount of mana just depending on how much lands you put in there. Hearthstone is a really simple system. It starts at 1, goes to 2, then 3, all the way up to 10. And since 10 is the max limit of mana crystals, that limits that limits what you can actually do with cards inherently. And that was a decision that was made very early on in the game, along with something like 30 health being like the upper limit, the health limit of heroes, not counting armor and stuff. So these, just even those two decisions have far-reaching implications into what Hearthstone can even do. So because there's no such thing as half mana crystals, you're stuck with these very clear cut amounts: 1, 2, 3, up through 10. So what that means is that there is a humongous difference between something like 0 mana cards, in which you could play 5 of them on any turn, along with the other thing you want to play, versus changing it just to 1 mana, like you see with Hunter's Mark. Having something that is 0, and you can literally play any turn, is a world of difference from something costing 1, even though it was only changed by 1 integer. And that's how Hearthstone is. It is such a fine balance to try and find how much something should cost, because the moment you go, you just add a single number to it, that can change everything. So something that is 3 attack, that suddenly is changed to 2 attack, like Knife Juggler, well, that means that minions that it would kill, which tend to be minions that cost more than it, and by killing it, they're permanently gone. Now, it doesn't kill. And that's super important, because that means that now there's a whole host of things that you can play against Knife Juggler that you normally wouldn't be able to play. So basically, Hearthstone is a place that has very limited and tight design, and there's only so much you can do. And although there's an infinite amount of card text you can put on there, still you have to pick a number that something's health is, and you have to pick a number that its attack is. And unlike something like Magic, again, that has multiple versions of the same minion but just for different types of cards, Hearthstone, I think, has wisely chosen to keep a majority of its cards neutral, which means that you just can't have 2 identical cards with the exact same cost. So there always has to be a slight difference between the two. And the very light touch that Blizzard has put into nerfing anything and balancing stuff, I think, is a result of just how dangerous it is to even change a single number on a card, because that one number always will have at least a 10% difference. Because think about it, you have 10 mana crystals, and something that costs 2, right? Changing that simply just to 3, well, that means that now, if you have 10 mana, if something costs 2, you can play 5 of those things, right? If it costs 3, you can only play 3 of those things. That's a huge difference, right? And you can never have 11 mana, you can never have 12 mana. You essentially always are stuck with this limited range. And so even tiny little changes can make big differences. So that's something that Hearthstone's design space has baked into it and will forever after. And it was decisions that were made very, very early in the game. And frankly, I'm amazed at how elegant of a system it is. Even when you look at all of the hero powers, from Mage's sort of 1 ping damage to anything versus Hunter's 2 damage, but always goes to face. they're actually very well balanced. And even though there's obviously a difference in the power of, say, Warlock being able to draw a card and Shaman getting like the random totems, still in terms of like having to deal with the very tight parameters that Hearthstone is set, it's really impressive like how much variety there can be. However, that variety is always hampered and limited by certain cards and certain decisions. So the one nerf change that I really want to talk about is Blade Flurry, and Blade Flurry was a nerf that I think a lot of people got kind of upset about. Why did they get upset about it? Because it was so heavy of a nerf. So you look at this card, Blade Flurry, and basically you have a card that first, whatever your attack of your weapon was, and because your weapon always has at least 2 charges when you're a rogue, at least when you equip a new one, if not more, you were able to hit somebody in the face and then play Blade Flurry and essentially hit them in the face again for that same damage and also to everything in their board. And it was really powerful, and it was cheap, and it was a necessary card in Rogue. It was one of their few, I mean, if not their only really good board clear. And also it gave your hero this huge burst of aggression. So why did they have to change it so heavily to not only cost more, but to not hit face? Well, I want to talk about design space. Now, we didn't see any new weapons come out in Whispers of the Old Gods, and so it does seem early. It's very preemptive. But it tells me that they have ideas for the types of cards they would want to give Rogue that they just can't implement because of something like Blade Flurry. And I'll give you an example of a card that they've already developed, they've already tested, and they probably could give to Rogue, and it would be awesome, but they couldn't if Blade Flurry existed the way it does now, instead of with the change. So, in Blackrock Mountain, or in the latest Tavern Brawl, actually, that had Kel'Thuzad fighting off against Archthief Rafam, there was a bunch of new legendaries, and one of these legendaries that you could play was Instructor Resuvius. And Instructor Resuvius was an 8-mana 3/3 that equipped a 5/2 weapon. It's actually a really balanced legendary. It seemed really powerful because there's just tons of powerful legendaries in that Tavern Brawl. But this one in particular, Blizzard was like actually cognizant of balance and was just, I think, trying to really test out some interesting designs. And we've seen a couple of those manifest now, which I'll talk about in another video. But what this massive Runeblade was this. It was a 5/2 weapon that actually dealt double damage to your heroes. That's awesome. So here's a weapon that is actually pretty finely tuned. You can only get it from this 8-mana card, so it costing 3 really doesn't matter because that's not how you got it. You got it from playing an 8-mana card, and you got this weapon that, yeah, could do 5 damage to a minion, but if you hit somebody in the face, it could do 10. Now that's a lot. So imagine if you had a card like Blade Flurry, and you were not only able to hit somebody in the face for 10, but then immediately after follow up with 5 more damage and clear out the entire board. You could just never do it. So a card that could double its damage, especially thinking how Rogue could then pump that weapon up. Imagine that you had a massive Runeblade, and then you were able to add 3 attack to it. That'd be insane. Any time that you have situations where you can double an effect, or you can temporarily add a whole bunch of stat buffs. Imagine something that was like Abusive Sergeant but worked on your weapon. Having cards like Brand Bronzebeard and stuff like that. What Blizzard is the most afraid of isn't wiping minions and being unfair to the minions on your board. It's when it's being unfair to the opponent's face. And they have seen time and time again players coming up with stuff that even probably they didn't imagine that allows you to kill enemies in really these uninteractive and unfun ways. And that's what I see when I see this change to Blade Flurry. With a card like this, you just can't do it. So I know that it feels like right now pretty unfair because they're not getting that weapon. But what they are getting is a couple of weapon buffing things, ways to make weapons sort of cheaper. And I think it's going to plant the seeds in people's minds of just how powerful Rogue. See little bits and pieces of it, especially when you look at Tavern Brawls. with a card like this, you just can't do it. So I know that it feels like right now pretty unfair because they're not getting that weapon. But what they are getting is a couple of weapon buffing things, ways to make weapons sort of cheaper, and I think it's going to plant the seeds in people's minds of just how powerful a rogue can be when we get back to really focusing on like weapons and weapon buffing and doing cool stuff with that. And personally, if it takes getting rid of Blade Flurry to get us there, I'm all for it, because I know that Blizzard comes up with really cool ideas. We've seen it in Tavern Brawls. We know that they're looking at user-created cards, and they love cool cards too. And I think they want the coolest cards they can in the game. But if it's going to break the game, and Hearthstone walks that razor's edge of even just single cards like we saw with Patron, just breaking the game, I'm glad with them playing it a little bit safe with stuff that stuff like this that they know can be degenerate and busted, and then let us figure out the combos that come afterwards that actually can be degenerate and busted. So those are my thoughts on sort of design space. Hearthstone is really just, it's a really finely tuned machine, and any change to any card, even a single mana addition or subtraction or whatever you do, just a single stat point on anything can change everything. And yeah, I like the way that they're handling it. I like that they are considering future design space, and hopefully now that Standard is coming out, and hopefully the Whispers of the Old Gods is coming out, and we've had that long dearth of no cards at all, hopefully things speed up a little bit and we start to see some more of this creative stuff happening, because they finally have a more controlled space that they know even if they create a degenerate card, it's going to eventually go away into wild, and hopefully they don't wait that long if something like that does appear. But I think this is finally the environment Blizzard wants, to finally be able to create the real impressive cards that they've been holding back on us. So those are my thoughts. Hopefully that was interesting to you guys, and we'll see you on Tuesday when we're doing massive amounts of pack openings and going to try out some brand new decks. So this is HearthDad coming at you. We'll see you next time.